today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, welcome back from the 4th of July weekend. What a wild weekend. I hope you had a good time and a pleasant weekend. I spent it writing. I just signed a contract to write a new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, and I'm having a lot of fun with it, digging into, actually it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau over the weekend. But anyhow, we got a lot to talk about today. Civil society is fully in a state of gun crisis. This shooting over the weekend, by the way, was just the tip of the iceberg. I'll get into that in a moment. And why is the media downplaying that the gun terrorist was a Trumpster? So weird. Remember when Bernie was, when a Bernie supporter shot Steve Scalise? And literally every day, almost every hour, it was like Bernie supporter shot, you know, Congress, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into that. Also, a child rapist. This guy raped a 12-year-old, impregnated her. She gave birth, and he was just awarded joint custody of her child. We'll get into that in the first hour of our program. In the second hour of our program, right-wingers on the court want to take away your First Amendment rights next. Yes, Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas have flagged this. I will tell you all about that in the second hour. It is shocking. And the same thing in Florida. DeSantis brings fascism to Florida. Now, is he going to bring it to all of America in 2024? He's got a new law giving him the right, well, actually, the duty to determine the political opinions of teachers and students in Florida's universities, and then based on their political opinions, decide whether or not he's going to fund those universities. And in our third hour, our single guest for the day, Dr. Bruce Grayson, he's got a new book out about the near-death experience. And what does this tell us about life? We're going to veer off politics for a little bit in our third hour for a fascinating conversation about the latest science about what happens when we die. And I think you're going to find it absolutely fascinating. So we've got a lot to talk about today. My op-ed this morning over at Hartmann Report .com is titled "Civil Society is Fully in a State of Gun Crisis." And, you know, I just, you know, lay this out. Yesterday was the 309th terrorist mass shooting in America so far this year. No other country in the world experiences this. And by the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg. In the last 72 hours, there's an amazing website, gunviolencearchive.org/last-72, number 72-hours. Gunviolencearchive.org/last-72 hours. In the last 72 hours, there have been 413 shootings in the United States. The number of victims range from 1 to 5. We only count the ones that are over 4 victims, or 4 deaths, actually, as mass shootings. But that's in the last 3 days, 413 additional shootings. Back in the 1950s, a typical gunshot victim had 1 or 2 wounds. Today, the number of wounds routinely is 5 or more. What do all these 413 shootings in the last 72 hours have in common? A gun. Every day on average, one of the approximately 175 daily shootings in the United States is a, quote, defensive gun use. 1 out of 175. great numbers, huh? And, you know, a routine traffic stop yesterday turned into a hail of bullets for Jayland Walker, 25-year-old unarmed black man who was shot by 8 police officers in Akron, Ohio. 60 gunshot wounds in his body. Of course, he was black. The guy who shot up Highland Park, suburban Chicago, Illinois, was, of course, white, and so, of course, he was, you know, arrested peaceably and probably taken to Burger King for lunch on the way to the jail. Bottom line is, civil society has certain requirements. If you're going to have a functioning civil society, there are a couple of things you have to have, and at the very top of that list, is a sense of public safety. I have worked in countries. I worked in Uganda during the Ugandan Civil War when Idi Amin got run out of the country. I've worked in Haiti. I've worked in, I could go through a list, but we were in Thailand during the military coup there. I was in Peru when the Shining Path was blowing stuff up. I was in Colombia. We had 3 bombs go off within 6 blocks of us when I was in Bogota back 30 years ago. I have been in societies where people don't feel safe. And I can tell you, when people don't feel safe, everything changes. First of all, people tend to embrace right-wing governments because the right-wingers are out there saying, oh, yeah, you don't feel safe? Well, just vote for us because we're the law and order people, and we will take care of those evil criminals. Right? This is how Nixon got elected in '68. I mean, his whole shtick was law and order. Remember it? So, number one, if you want to have a safe society, you've got to have, or if you want to have a functioning civil society, you've got to have a safe society. So, if somebody wanted to really screw up America, somebody like, say, Vladimir Putin, wanted to really disrupt our country, how do you do it? Well, how about taking us from where Europe is right now? Most European countries, you have 15 to 20 weapons per 100 people. Some are as low as 10 weapons per 100 people. And by the way, in the United States, 40 years ago, at the beginning of the Reagan Revolution, we were at around 30 weapons per 100 people in the United States. But over the last 40 years, since the Reagan Revolution, or since the NRA got taken over in 1978 by basically the weapons manufacturers and some right-wing crazies, we are now over 120 guns per 100 people. There are over 400 million guns in America. All of this just in the last 40 years. This is another echo of the Reagan Revolution. And people say, well, you know, so what? Well, you know, there are more car accidents in New York City than there are in Boise, Idaho. Why? Because there's more cars. There's more car accidents in Portland, Oregon than there is in Roseburg, Oregon. Why? Because there's more cars. More cars, more accidents, more guns, more shootings. This is common sense. What kind of idiot can't acknowledge this? So if you wanted to destroy the United States, all you have to do is get the number of guns per people up to a certain threshold where, you know, you start having a couple hundred, 415 shootings in a 3-day period. And guess what? We're there right now. We have 400 million guns in the United States. Which reminds me of a headline I saw on September 17th, 2019 from NPR. Quote, the National Rifle Association acted as a foreign asset for Russia in the period leading up to the 2016 election, according to a new investigation. Or one from a year earlier. This was in Politico, April 11, 2018. Quote, the National Rifle Association reported this week that it received more money from people with Russian ties than it had previously acknowledged, but announced that it was officially done cooperating with the congressional inquiry exploring whether illicit Kremlin-linked funding passed through the NRA into Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Right. And the congressional committee never even bothered to try to enforce the subpoena of the NRA. But let's just assume that the NRA wasn't really trying to disrupt and destroy American democracy, and that Putin was only giving support to the NRA and inviting people like Senators Ron Johnson and John Kennedy over to Moscow for the 4th of July because he's a nice guy. Let's assume that there was actually no plan here I mean, I realize this sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? Let's assume that there was no real plan here to just destroy America. Let's just assume it was just a coincidence that we ended up with 400 million guns in a country of 330 million people. So how do we get here? Well, it started out with the NRA telling lies in the late 70s and early 80s about what the Second Amendment meant. Everybody in the 70s and 80s understood the Second Amendment was about a militia. And it was. It was entirely about a militia. There was a huge debate at the founding of our republic about whether we should have a standing army during times of peace or whether we should do like Switzerland does, and the state militias are active throughout the year, and if the country is invaded, they become federalized. We wrote that into the Constitution. It's in two places. The power to call forth the militia, they're both in Article 1, Section 8, the power to call forth the militia, and the fact that Congress can only appropriate money for the Army for 2 years. That debate ended with the War of 1812. We've had a permanent standing army well-funded ever since then because we had to rely on state militias. Jefferson took the federal army from 300,000 down to fewer than 10,000 during his 8 years in the White House. And then as James Madison became president, Britain and Canada just marched into our country, made it all the way down to Washington, D.C., and burned the White House. So, we're not having that debate anymore, but that was the background, that and the slave patrols in the South. And I lay out the entire history of this over at HartmannReport.com this morning in this op-ed. That was the background of the Second Amendment. Now, Scalia lied through his teeth in the Heller decision, and the NRA continues to lie, saying, oh, no, the founders put it in there for self-defense, or the founders put it in there so that if our politicians ever start behaving badly, we can shoot them. That was as stupid, that is as stupid an idea now as it would have been had it been proposed back in 1787, but it never was. Nobody ever even suggested such a thing. And yet when I brought this up over the weekend on Twitter, I must have had 30 people say, oh no, the Second Amendment is there to prevent tyranny. No, it's not. It's to prevent an army from staging a coup. This is totally bizarre.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is America. We need to get this under control, this gun violence problem. And the bottom line is there's too many guns. And welcome back. Kurt in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, congratulations on signing the contract for your 9th book. Hopefully it comes out in winter, correct?
It'll come out next spring. Yeah, there's one coming out this fall, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America. That'll be out
and
in September.
Pre-ordered that on Amazon.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, the reason I'm calling is that shooting for Jalen Walker that happened, that actually happened down the street from where I live.
Whoa.
Yeah, because I live off of Wilbeth Road in Firestone Park, in the Firestone Park neighborhood of Akron. And that chase started on, the high-speed chase started on in the North Hill neighborhood of Akron, going down Route 8 and heading south into the Firestone Park area. But the local media right now, which is the Akron Beacon Journal, the Canton Repository, those types of places, those types of newspapers, are reporting that this may, and I can't confirm this, but this may have possibly been a suicide by cop.
I doubt that, because typically with suicide by cop, you run toward the police, not away from them.
Right, and I guess what they're saying is, and I'm just giving you what the local news is telling everybody here.
Yeah, they're trying to justify the police.
I think that's what it is. They're trying to justify the police, but what they're trying to say is he lost his fiance in a car accident in Cincinnati a month ago. He had left his ring and his gun inside the car, that sort of thing, which I'm still trying to figure out because originally they said he took a shot at the police first, and that's what caused 8 police officers to hit him with 60 rounds, with 90 rounds that were shot. Right. And as a result of this, the Rib, White, and Blue Fest was canceled for the 4th of July holiday in downtown Akron because people were worried about violence. And then Sunday night there were riots and fires in downtown Akron because of what happened. Storefronts were smashed. I mean, it looked like Kent, Ohio in 1970.
Wow.
And I guess the Rubber Ducks, our minor league baseball team for the Cleveland Guardians, was canceled. And the fireworks got canceled, and Mayor Dan Horrigan placed the city of Akron on a 9 p.m. curfew last night.
Here's my guess of what might have happened. And again, we're all guessing here right now, but, you know, he did have a gun in his car, or at least that's what the police are reporting right now. And so I'm just trying to put myself in his mind. If I'm a black man and I'm being being chased by the police and I've got a gun, I'm thinking.
Can I say something real quick about that? Real quick, is the night before, I guess, according to the local media, he had tried this before and it didn't work. So
tried what
I just
before?
wanted to add a high-speed chase again like that the night before.
Huh. Okay. Well, what I was thinking is, you know, if I'm a black man with a gun in my car, I'm thinking. I'm forgetting his name right off the top of my head, but the guy, you know, where the police came up and he said, I have a permit for a gun. And as he reached for his wallet to show them the permit, they shot him dead. And
was that the gentleman up in Michigan?
I don't recall where he was, but you know, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. There's been so many. But if I'm a black man with a gun in my car, I'm thinking, if the police see this gun, they're going to shoot me dead. And so get out of the car and run, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know what happened. We're going to have to wait and see, but I think it's reasonable to say that 60 bullets in a person's body is a little more than necessary
Yes,
to
I
slow
agree
them
with
down,
that.
stop them, or whatever. I just, you know.
But I just wanted to give you the local flavor of what the local media here in Northeast Ohio is giving people, and they're trying to say that it might very well have been, which I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm just telling you what the media is saying is it could have been suicide by cop.
Okay. Kurt, thank you very much for that. Gary in Chicago. Hey, Gary, what's up?
The Supreme Court said that the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't have the authority to tell power plants to go green. But in fact, the 1963 Clean Air Act, Congress gave the authority to the EPA to take care of the environment.
That's right.
But now, Supreme Court says Congress can only tell them. But they already told them because they created the EPA in 1963.
Right. So your point that the Supreme Court is you know, lying through their teeth as usual, or at least the 6 Republicans on the court. I mean, there were 3 Democrats who were opposed to that ruling.
Yeah, my point is that climate change is so serious they can't play any kind of political games with it because it's dramatically, you know, taking over, you know, everybody's attention.
Yeah.
If you were to go to YouTube,
I get it. No, I got it, Gary. Gary, I'm sorry, I got to run, but I got it. Thank you very much. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Say what? And welcome back. Another amazing story, absolutely amazing story in today's news. This, again, the insanity that we're seeing around these issues. A Sanilac County Circuit judge, I believe this is in Michigan, has awarded parenting time and joint legal custody of an 8-year-old boy to a convicted sex offender who raped the child's mother 9 years ago when she was 12 years old. He raped her, she gave birth to the boy at the age of 12, she was, and now 8 years later, he's sued for custody and won custody. Her attorney, Rebecca Kiesling, is saying, this is insane. She says, nothing has been right about this since it was originally investigated. He was never properly charged and should be sitting behind bars somewhere. But the system is victimizing my client, who was a child herself when this happened. Judge Ross ordered his name added to the child's birth certificate. She said her client was notified, this is the young woman who was 12 when he raped her, that she was, quote, not allowed to move 100 miles from where she has been living when the case was filed without court consent. Since his conviction for rape, by the way, he was convicted of raping this 12-year-old, served 6 months in jail. Now he has child custody over the kid. Since that conviction in 2008 for raping the 12-year-old, he has been convicted of raping another child, for which he served 4 years in prison. So we've got this. I found this on the internet. It was on Twitter this morning. The Republican Party rape advisory chart. These are the various different kinds of rape according to Republican politicians. There's the gift from God form of rape. This is Richard Moorcock, the Republican Senate candidate. Right after he was endorsed by Mitt Romney, he said, quote, when life begins with that horrible situation of rape, that's something that God intended to happen. Then, of course, there is legitimate rape. Todd Aiken, if it's a legitimate rape, the female body has its ways of shutting that whole thing down. Then there's honest rape. This was Republican Congressman Ron Paul, and presidential candidate. If it's an honest rape, that individual should go immediately to the emergency room, and I'd give him a shot of estrogen. Then there's emergency rape. Republican Senate candidate Linda McMahon of wrestling fame, in October of 2015, she said, it was really an issue about a Catholic church being forced to offer those pills if the person came in an emergency rape. Then there's easy rape. State Representative Roger Rivard of Wisconsin. If you go down that road, some girls, they rape so easy. Then there's forcible rape. Republican vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan and 214 other Republicans sponsored a bill that would prohibit funding of abortions except in cases of, quote, forcible rape. And then, of course, there's enjoyable rape. Clayton Williams, Republican from Texas.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Who said famously, if it's inevitable, just relax and enjoy it. Ain't the GOP great? We'll be right back.
Our book for the book report today. Is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. Yeah. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services at Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc. as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back, 34 minutes past the hour. By the way, this young man who shot all these people in Highland Park
had been to at least one, and I'm seeing on Twitter 2, but let's wait for the final reporting to come in. Trump rallies. There's pictures of him all over social media wrapping himself in a Trump flag. I remember back in 2017, in June of 2017, and in fact, I just plugged into DuckDuckGo. Bernie supporter shoots Steve Scalise. Steve Scalise, you'll recall, is the Republican congressman from Louisiana. He ran on a platform of being David Duke without the baggage, was his phrase. He's now the number 2, I believe, Republican in Republican leadership in the House of Representatives. And he was wounded by a guy who had been to a Bernie event of some kind, wounded in a baseball game in June of 2017, a congressional baseball game. And you look at the headlines. CNN, Bernie Sanders supporter strongly anti-Trump shoots congressman. Newsweek, Representative Steve Scalise shot by Sanders supporter, replies to request. IB Times, top U.S. Republican Steve Scalise shot by Bernie Sanders supporter. Blasting news, shooter of Representative Steve Scalise was a Bernie Sanders supporter. Conservative firing line, deceased Bernie supporter who shot Representative Steve Scalise on Facebook. American Thinker, Bernie bro shot Steve Scalise. The Advocate, Steve Scalise shooter James Hodgkins, staunch Bernie Sanders. And it just goes on and on. I mean, the Federalist shooter was Bernie bro who joined Terminate Republican Party group. YouTube, insane Bernie Sanders supporter shoots up Republican baseball. I heard about this for weeks. Yesterday, I was watching MSNBC, and the host asked the guest, does this guy have any political affiliation? Well, no, not that we can tell. He seems to be just into suicide and morbid stuff. Right. So when shooters are Democrats, it becomes a news story that lasts for literally weeks. When shooters are Republicans, well, jeez, not so much. Incredible. By the way, just following up, and then I'll pick up your phone calls, following up on the stories, what would you call them? The Supreme Court decision on abortion. This is amazing stuff. Jessica Valenti has a newsletter all in her head. It's Jessica it's over at Substack.com. I think it's jessica.substack.com. And she has links to, this is Becky. Becca Liz on Twitter. I've never had an abortion, but my access to health care has changed because Roe was overturned. I have lupus, which is an inflammatory autoimmune disease that causes my immune system to attack my organs, joints, skin, and muscles. I take methotrexate as one of my treatments. I received an email from my rheumatologist today that they are stopping all refills because it is considered an abortifacient. Right. And then here's another one. This is from Oyes Como VA, ESQ. I live in Virginia. I'm on low-dose naltrexone as an off-label treatment for long COVID to reduce clotting. My pharmacy won't refill my prescription because it can cause miscarriage. I mean, this is happening right now. Over on Instagram, Chloe. Wasn't going to post about this, but it's important that people see. I am currently 25 weeks pregnant with a baby girl. We just found she is incompatible with life. She isn't going to make it. I knew what I wanted to do. I needed to terminate. My baby is suffering inside me, having seizures multiple times a day. I feel every single one. I knew I didn't want her to suffer any longer. I let my doctor know of my choice, and he said he would schedule an abortion for me. Well, Friday came along, and the overturn of Roe v. Wade happened. I thought I would be okay, that the law would go into effect, but my doctor called me today and told me I have to remain pregnant until this baby dies inside of me. Wow. Okay. Picking up your phone calls. Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Always good to listen to your show. As you mentioned, Park Ridge is very close to Highland Park. I've lived in the northwest suburbs of Chicago for well over 30 years. But I spent a lot of time in Florida. And you remember the movie Jaws, who doesn't?
Yeah.
And I, like I don't know how many other people, after seeing that movie, I was somewhat afraid to go in the water. The movie just scared the hell out of me. Well, now we have mass shootings throughout all public places, and we've created an ocean of fear on land. You know, whether it's a grocery store, a school, a July 4th parade, a shopping mall, a church. How can you not look over your shoulder in society? And what my point is that there's little chance of ever being attacked by a shark, if any. Now, there's a greater chance of being caught up in a mass shooting, but there's a residual psychological sickness now in our society of PTSD over these weapons of war, which increases one's chance of being caught up or knowing someone. By the way, I have relatives in Highland Park that fortunately weren't affected by the shooting. But I just think that it's very important that not only do we take the weapons of war out of public for the purpose of protecting life, but also protecting the collective sanity and mental health of that society.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the part of this that concerns me even more is our children. I mean, one of the reporters yesterday, I forget which network I was watching, but he made the comment that it was surprising to him, it was a woman who was there. In fact, I think it was Lynn Sweet, the Chicago Times columnist. She said that the thing that was surprising was how all the kids at the parade, orderly, they didn't panic. They just started moving out of the way. They knew what to do. Why did they know what to do? Because they've been trained in mass shooter trainings in their public schools. This is insane. We are literally the only country in the world that teaches children how to avoid mass shootings in their schools, because we're the only country in the world that has mass shootings in our schools as a regular feature of our society. And this is just not good. I mean, this is just not good. And it's not good for our kids.
I'm old enough to... I was in elementary school during the missile crisis back in the early 60s, Khrushchev,
62.
Kennedy, as they faced off. And we used to say goodbye to one another, not knowing whether or not we would meet the next day.
Well, I remember duck and cover, Steve. I'm probably a little older than you, and I remember really well as a little kid jumping under our desks and putting our fingers over our eyes and our thumb in our ears. But I don't recall ever taking it seriously. I mean, I
totally agree. I don't have children. Well, I do have children, but they're grown. But I can't imagine the angst that not only the children but the teachers feel entering just the school on a daily basis. Yeah. I mean, we really, I'm a progressive Democrat. We really have to hammer home, get these, I won't say the swear word, assault weapons of war out of the public domain.
Yep. Yeah.
Period.
We need to restore the assault weapons ban. During that assault weapons ban, by the way, from 1994 until 2004, I believe it was, we actually saw a decrease in mass shootings because their assault weapons were not widely available. Steve, thank you. Thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, with this recent Supreme Court decision about taking up the independent state legislature doctrine, it came to my mind that fascism is unavoidable. And there was a liberal that called in about this Highland Park shooter. I'm sure he had a good heart, but he said this is Donald Trump's fault. Donald Trump has been is a hero of a fictional, universe that these shooters live in, right? But really, it doesn't matter. The difference between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis could be like the difference between Admiral Horthy in the Hungarian fascist regime and Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
All right, we don't actually know, and I think it's inevitable though. And when Governor Noem was talking about, we should focus on the guy that raped that girl,
the 10-year-old,
the perpetrator.
Yeah, she was talking about weaselly. I mean, that was insane. That interview with Dana, what's her name? Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. Dana Bash. That's right.
Well, for some reason, this caller on your show, when you said like 1%, maybe less than 1% of the elite donor class of the Republican Party might be psychopaths, she called up and called you a psychopath. I was like, why am I thinking about Thom Hartmann here? Why? I came up with it. Look, we need to realize who the enemy is. Every fascist regime requires an enemy. And I think it's about time we start talking about who that enemy is. And because I don't think there's any way to avoid it now.
Well, the fascist regimes. I mean, this is Ron DeSantis saying that he's going to interview every teacher and student in Florida colleges about their politics. That's fascism, and we know who the bad guys are here. It's the professors, right? It's the liberals. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Todd in Seattle. Hey, Todd, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'll try not to get too excited. I wouldn't bother you, but I was so heartbroken about what happened yesterday.
You're talking Highland Park?
Yeah, 4th of July parade. Come on.
Yeah.
In this society we have today, everybody's so worried about being polite and correct and all that. And I think it's time for the Democrats to call it the way it is. And with the Republicans, they use the Democrat thing. Yeah. Well, I think we should try using Republican. And the GOP stands for guns over people.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of name calling, Todd, but I do think that it's time to start. Jamie Harrison, the head of the DNC, was on this program, and he said the Republican Party has become a fascist party. I think that every Democrat in America should be using that language.
Name calling is kind of an ignorant thing, but we need to start making the point and calling it the way it is.
Yeah.
The recent gun legislation that was passed was only agreed to so they could say they actually did something, because like the previous caller, what needs to happen is get the military weapons out of the private citizens' hands.
Yep.
The terminology used to describe the weapon, assault weapon, shows intent in itself.
Yep.
Who do you plan to assault with this weapon? And the clips they use, the large capacity, no, that's not large capacity, that's mass capacity. That's what they need.
These are weapons of war. They're designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and the only reason that they exist is to kill people. I mean, these are not, you don't go deer hunting with an AR-15, or if you do, you're not a sportsman. You're some kind of weird wimp, who is.
Yeah, get your man card back.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to be a man, you don't have a chance in the first place.
Yeah, it's
and
pathetic.
100-round capacity. If you need 100 rounds to hit what you're shooting at, you shouldn't have it either.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. What is this?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. Very well said, Todd. Todd, thank you. Pat in San Diego. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Oh, you were missed over the long weekend.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm calling because I wake up every day in fear over this Supreme Court and what it's going to do to the nation and to our government next. And I thought, how DeSantis and all those people just go full hog on everything and do whatever they want. I think our Democratic legislators, like Governor Newsom and the DAs, the Democratic DAs that we have across the nation, the Democratic mayors, etc., should start resisting and rejecting whatever the Supreme Court says, and just say that it was illegitimately configured, it was trumped up on purpose, and that we do not recognize what it says, because we need to delegitimize the Supreme Court and take away its power, we are in great danger.
I'm with you.
And,
I'm with you, Pat.
yeah.
Did you see, by the way, that Gavin Newsom, the California governor, is running ads in Florida?
Yeah, that's great.
That's hysterical, you know.
Call him out.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Pat, for the call. Yeah, he's running ads in Florida saying to Florida voters that Ron DeSantis is taking away your freedom. It's incredible. If you haven't seen it, go looking for it and check it out. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Hey, Tom. These gun laws get more insane by the day.
Yeah.
Indiana, their new permitless carry, which means you no longer need a permit to carry a gun.
Just like Texas did a few months ago.
Goes even further than Texas because the police can no longer even question a person with the gun if they have it lawfully.
Whoa.
There literally can be a person with a gun standing outside a school, and the police cannot question them.
That's nuts. This is friggin' nuts.
Yes, it is. And I know you usually do only one subject per person, but can I add another one in that I actually
very quickly, Margie?
The medications for women, it's worse than you think. Please contact Lupus Foundation. Please contact people in Wisconsin. Women in Wisconsin are being denied cancer treatment.
Yep, I know. I just read two examples of those, but yeah, the Lupus Foundation would be a good guest.
Yes, they've got something. They've actually have information online for women who are systematically now have had their medications terminated. Please get a hold of somebody from there and get them on the air.
Yeah, we'll do it. Margie, thank you very much for the call. Teresa in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Teresa, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I have to say that the problem we're facing, of course, is so many weapons. We've got to do something about the weapons on the streets. But honestly, the gratuitous violence, the only way to stop this gratuitous violence is to give everyone more opportunities and better education, and that has to start in kindergarten.
I don't disagree that those would be good things and that we would probably be a less violent society. But, I mean, just, like I said, there's more car accidents in New York City than there are in Portland because there's more cars. I mean, the more guns you have, the more shootings you're going to have. And we have gone from having 20 guns per 100 Americans, more or less, about 40 years ago, to now having 120 guns for every 100 Americans. And so, it shouldn't surprise anybody what's going on. Teresa, thank you for the call. Mary Gay in Spokane. Hey, Mary Gay, what's up?
Hi. I just wanted to let you know I called the January 5th committee tip line.
The 6th committee, yeah. Uh-huh.
The 6th, yes. Back in November, I had seen a comment on Daily Kos, or a 5-minute video that showed Louis Gohmert actually speaking to a crowd and inciting an insurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you shared that. I didn't know that there was a tip line for the January 6th committee. I know there's one for the FBI, but there is.
Nope. There's one directly to the committee.
Huh. Interesting. How do you find that? Is there a website for it, I'm assuming?
Yep. I just, January 6th committee tip line.
Huh. And it comes right up. Well, Mary Gay, good on you.
Right up.
Activism of the day. Good on you. Thank you. Brian in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hi there, Tom. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about for abortion rights and the common argument that we have that there are no U.S. laws that force somebody to give up their life for someone else's. Something I've seen recently is the question of a duty to rescue, that there are laws or at least thoughts for if you have a special relationship, such as a parent to a child, that you could be held liable, have a duty to rescue something, or in this case, the fetus possibly for an abortion. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I would like to know if you've ever thought of that or heard that argument of duty to rescue applying to abortion rights.
That's an interesting one. I mean, the story I just shared off Instagram of this woman who was 23 weeks into her pregnancy. I mean, that's post-viability, generally speaking. And the baby is now having seizures and is dying in her womb. And she was and is going to, is not going to survive outside her body. And she was told that you can't have an abortion. You got to wait for this baby to die inside you. That just seems to me like brutalizing women. And so I would think that something like a duty to rescue would come into place. Brian, I don't know much about this. Is this based on law, or is this based? I mean, I can see where a police officer or a physician may have a duty to rescue.
Yes, there are, as far as I've seen, there are no major laws yet on this type of idea. It's come into play, for example, I think one that's commonly used is a therapist to a patient. Mm-hmm. If a patient says to a therapist that they are suicidal or plan to have a suicidal, is it legally liable for the therapist? Do they have a special relationship with that patient to do something? Right. Or if they don't do anything, that's
well, that falls into the harm to yourself or others. Even priests and doctors have to violate that seal of privacy if there's clear intent or probability of harm to yourself or others. Brian, thank you for the call. Fascinating. Let me ponder that one. We'll be back. I want to get into right-wingers in the court. Want to pull your First Amendment rights next. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam, and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested. Tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. By the way, I love the fact that I've got the smartest listeners in the world on this program, and thank you specifically to some of the folks who reached out on Twitter over the last 10 minutes or so and pointed out what I missed, which is that the judge who had awarded child custody to that rapist reversed his decision when he learned that, well, when the outrage started, shall we say, when he learned that this guy had been convicted of rape with regard to that girl. How that didn't come before the judge in the first place is baffling to me. I think this is a clear breakdown of our judicial system. But just lest your outrage continue to boil, that's the kind of closing the loop on that story. Whew, amazing. So yesterday was the 4th of July, and while we didn't do a program yesterday, I did publish an article, an op-ed over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Next Right-Wingers on the Court Want to Take Your First Amendment Rights. And I published it because it was the 4th of July, and it was a story about the founding of our republic, about how John Adams, back in 1798, when he was president, our first president was George Washington, then came John Adams, and then in the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson beat Adams. Jefferson was Adams's vice president, by the way. In 1798, John Adams got seriously pissed off at a bunch of newspapers. There was about 20 of these, they call them Democratic Republican newspapers, or sometimes they just referred to them as Republican newspapers. Adams was, of course, a Federalist. He was our first genuinely conservative president. And he was very, very upset that these newspapers were not on his side. They were calling him out. Benjamin Franklin Bach, Ben Franklin's grandson, they called him Lightning Rod Jr., published a newspaper called the Aurora in Massachusetts. And he published an op-ed and an opinion piece, an editorial, saying that Adams was old, toothless, querulous, balding, and blind Adams was the phrase that he used, if I'm remembering correctly. It's in the article. And Adams went nuts, and his wife Abigail as well. And we know more about what she had to say about it than what Adams had to say about it, because her writings have endured over the last 240 years. But she basically went to Congress and said, you guys have to do something, as did her husband, as did John Adams. And so they passed the Alien Sedition Acts, a set of 4 laws that made it a crime to criticize the president or the government of the United States. And the day that Adams signed the legislation, before it even went into effect, it went into effect the following day, the day that he signed it, he had Benjamin Franklin Bach arrested. And then he had 20 other publishers arrested. 10 of them ended up with long prison sentences for criticizing the president. Jefferson, the day that Adams signed this bill, left town and never again spoke to John Adams in person for the rest of his life, even though he was vice president for the next 2 years. Never again saw him in person. They struck up a correspondence later in their old age and kind of made up with each other. It was brokered by Dr. Rush, Dr. Benjamin Rush. But, this was a big deal. That John Adams, was defying the First Amendment. And, we all had thought we got past that. There was a half-hearted attempt by Woodrow Wilson during World War I to do the same thing. We got another Alien and Sedition Act, but that was specifically about people who were trash-talking World War I. It was much more narrow in scope and not much less widely applied and didn't include criticism of President Wilson, although it was still a terrible piece of legislation. But, we had all thought, this ain't going to ever happen again. Well, now we've got this case where a hate group came before the Supreme Court and said that the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated us a hate group, and this is hurting our fundraising and our efforts to promote our hate, and therefore we would like to sue the Southern Poverty Law Center into bankruptcy for libel. But the problem is you can't sue, public figures can't sue. So, if you're a hate group and you put your name out there, you're a public figure. You can't sue somebody. It's like I can't sue somebody if they trash talk me. I mean, there was a guy on Twitter just a few minutes ago calling me a fascist. I can't sue him. I'm a public figure. I'm okay with that. This was decided in 1984 in a U.S. Supreme Court decision called New York Times v. Sullivan, or was nailed down. It was broadly believed to be the law for, 100 years before that, but the Supreme Court finally nailed it down in 84. So anyhow, this group comes to the Supreme Court and says, we want to sue the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, and the Supreme Court says, no, we're not going to take the case. But Clarence Thomas issues a dissenting opinion, saying, no, we should take this case. And in a case last year, Neil Gorsuch said essentially the same thing. So we've got two of the right-wingers on the Supreme Court who want to do away with the protection, basically, that you and I have to go on Twitter and say, I think Biden's a terrible president, or I think, Trump is a terrible president, or whatever, I'm not saying Biden's a terrible president. I think he's a damn good president, actually. But you get my point. If this Times v. Sullivan is blown up and you go on Twitter and you criticize Ted Cruz, he can sue you. Or you criticize Clarence Thomas and he can sue you. And in fact, that's what, Clarence Thomas said in his dissent. He said that commentators cast false aspersions on public figures with near impunity. Well, yeah, that's called free speech. But Thomas is not happy about that, and neither is Gorsuch. Unless you think that, we dodged the bullet because they didn't pick up this case, I would like to point out to you that Clarence Thomas, in previous dissents, said that there's no right to abortion in the Constitution. He said that like years ago, and now it's law. He said there's no right to vote for president in the Constitution. That was in 2000, 22 years ago. It's law now. He said there's no constitutional power to sustain the EPA in the Constitution 3 years ago, and that's law now. He argued that the right to a gun is sacrosanct, and that is now law now. So when Clarence Thomas speaks as the senior most and arguably most powerful member of the Supreme Court right now, we should all listen. We need to be paying attention to this. And now, to further complicate this, in South Carolina, a bunch of Republican legislators have introduced legislation that makes it a crime to tell a pregnant woman how to get an abortion, or to run a website that tells pregnant women how to find an abortion, or directs people to abortion, or talks about how to self-administer an abortion. Now that I can get, that's dangerous. That could be considered medical advice. But everything else, I mean, they're posting a website. Now, it probably won't become law in South Carolina, but who knows? This is a very dangerous beginning. This is a very dangerous precedent. They've already blown up our abortion laws. They've done away with our Miranda rights. They've gutted our union rights. They've gutted our voting rights. This is the Supreme Court, the they I'm talking about. They've filled our nation with guns, and now they're coming after reporters and you and me if we speak out. I'm very concerned about this and the broad direction that the Supreme Court is going. And I think that we need to be pushing back loud and hard. It's time to expand the court. It's time to impose a code of judicial ethics on the court. I mean, Clarence Thomas ruled in a case to keep his own wife's behavior a secret. He was the lone dissenting vote. How does that not get you impeached? We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So the Supreme Court has taken away our Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Miranda rights, our 14th Amendment rights. Is the First Amendment next? And welcome back. Dr. Robert in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Dr. Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Keep up the good work. I'm wanting to talk about a letter I just submitted to the journal Nature. Mm-hmm. They take commentaries now and then and correspondence.
Yep.
It's called The Science of Sedition, and it actually bears on what you've been talking about regarding this pseudoscientific term that's been bandied about called stochastic violence or stochastic terrorism.
Right.
You've heard that term, I believe.
I've written about it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, the requirement I believe that the discipline of science overall has right now is to stop allowing misuse of that term and actually study it as a public health issue. As you say, there's scientific ways of looking at things like the base rate fallacy that you talked about, the number of cars in an area and having to do with accidents. If you don't look at that scientifically, you can draw all sorts of very dangerous false conclusions that the fascistically oriented might like to draw. But I believe that it's time for something like the Manhattan Project, at least within the public health sphere, to look into what is stochastic violence. It's, the general idea, I think you've highlighted it, is that you can sort of stir the pot. You don't directly say to someone, go kill someone, but you sort of stir the pot so that Trump says, let's go to the Capitol and take care of them.
Right. And that's arguably even more specific than the typical pot stirrer who is simply out there saying, our country's being taken away, and in 1776 they fought back with guns, and then boom.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think the other metaphor, other than stirring the pot, is throwing the lighted match.
Yeah.
I saw that in the commentary, and that's more what it's really close to, is, putting the right fuel to the right combustion, and then it's going to burn, and you can say, I don't remember throwing a match.
Well, I'd love to see your article. If it's not, I subscribe to Nature, and I get their daily email newsletter, but if it's not published, feel free to send it to me. I'd love to see it.
I will. Actually, they're very stringent. They made me cut it down to 250 words, and it was very difficult.
Well, that's a good sign, though. That means that they're considering it for publication.
Yeah, I hope they do. But in any case, I'll send it to you because I'd like to have it circulate in the people that listen to your show. The people that don't listen to your show, probably nothing is going to help them. But this is evidence that we could push for. And scientists in general want to get to the bottom of things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this isn't. I mean, you're putting it in the context of public health. I take it from the way you're talking. I think it should also be put in the context of national security.
Well, actually, that's interesting. You should say that because the former FDA administrator, that was the point he made about COVID, is that it's not just public health in the narrowest sense; it's a national security issue.
Right. And
public health and national security are overlapped. I want to just also end, I just got a call from a relative and an old friend in California who said that Trump has finally gone too far. They're a lifelong Republican and always voted for Trump. But now they're thinking of moving. I said, where? They said, out of California because of Governor Newsom. He's the problem.
Oh, geez.
Can you believe that?
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that, we got a call from an old friend over the weekend who's moving to Portugal. Just like, I'm over it with the fascism. And I'm like, don't leave. We need to fight. No, I'm moving. Dr. Robert, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
So if you want to know what the Republicans are for, you'll recall, President Biden recently in his one-year anniversary of becoming president speech said that, who would have imagined that all they were in favor of doing was just obstructing anything I'm doing. And then he went on to say, what are the Republicans for? What does Mitch McConnell stand for? Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, actually went and talked to the number of Republican senators when he was thinking about running for the Senate, asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're just here basically obstructing Biden. That's all we're doing. And Sununu said, screw that. I'm not going to run for the Senate then. He said they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It bothered me that they were okay with that. So then, Mitch McConnell got asked by an NBC, Leanne Caldwell at NBC, what are you guys going to do if you get elected? And McConnell said, I'll tell you after the election. This is nuts. We got a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Speaking of ripping up our First Amendment rights, as I was just, going through how it looks like this is going to be up next on, at least it's up next for Gorsuch and Thomas. They're looking at this very carefully. Down in Florida, Ron DeSantis just signed a piece of legislation, actually this was a week or so ago, that would require Florida students and professors in Florida colleges to register their political views with the state. This is a piece by Brett Bachman, published over at Salon.com. Public universities in Florida will be required to survey both faculty and students on their political beliefs and viewpoints, with the institutions at risk of losing their funding if the responses are not satisfactory to the state's Republican-led legislature. This is a part that he writes of a long-running nationwide right-wing push to promote, quote, intellectual diversity on campus. The responses, by the way, will not be anonymous. DeSantis said, it used to be thought that a university campus was a place where you'd be exposed to a lot of different ideas. Unfortunately, now the norm is these are more intellectually repressive environments. You have orthodoxies that are promoted and other viewpoints are shunned or even suppressed. Yes, it's true. There are Nazis who want to come on our campuses and give speeches, and we have colleges that are saying, no Nazis. You've got white supremacists who want to come on campus and give speeches, and you've got campuses and colleges saying, no, we're not going to put white supremacists, in front of a classroom. It's just, how is this? Well, okay, so DeSantis, also state representative, or state senator, Ray Rodriguez is the sponsor of this. According to the Tampa Bay Times, both Santos and Rodriguez suggested that the state could institute budget cuts if university students and staff do not respond in a satisfactory manner. Quote, that's not worth tax dollars, and that's not something we're going to support going forward, DeSantis said, of supporting universities. He went on to point out that he says, quote, there's a lot of parents who worry that their children are being indoctrinated on campus. The Senate President Wilton Simpson of the Florida Senate called the institutions socialism factories. And in addition to the survey, this bill also contains a language that prevents officials from limiting campus speech that, quote, may be uncomfortable, disagreeable, or offensive. Now, this is really interesting. In elementary schools, they're saying you can't teach the racial history of America or the history of slavery because it makes our kids uncomfortable. But in the colleges, they're saying you can't ban people from speaking because what they say may make you uncomfortable. Why is that? Well, because they want to make it easier for groups like the Klan or the Proud Boys to hold events on campus. It's very straightforward. One of the top lobbyists pushing the bill is a guy named Barney Bishop. And he said that the bill is less about intellectual diversity and more concerned with maintaining, this is not a verbatim quote, this is from the article in Salon, and more concerned with maintaining the country's conservative Christian identity in the face of younger, more diverse generations. Bishop, this is the top legislator who pushed this legislation through, Also told the paper, he's talking about the Tampa Bay, or the Miami Herald rather, quote, he certainly hopes the effort will expand into the K-12 system over time. He said, I think the problem isn't just in higher ed. The truth of the matter is that kids are being indoctrinated from an early age. Right. And of course, so now you've got Gavin Newsom running ads in Florida saying, you know, your governor is taking away your freedoms. He's taking away your freedoms, kid, to learn in the public schools. He's taking away. I mean, he just goes through the whole list. It's absolutely fascinating. We should in fact find. I'll do it tomorrow. We'll find and play the clip of that ad because it's a masterpiece. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. John in Bowie, Maryland. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just want to say that first of all, like always, the show is excellent.
Thank you.
And you get so much, information from the callers. But I would just like to and I was going to add, something to the conversation, but a lot of things have already been said, so I'll just make it real brief. I do believe that with all these Supreme Court decisions, it has definitely impacted the credibility of the Supreme Court, and I think one of the Supreme Court justices made an excellent statement in that they are supplanting the expertise of organizations, of professionals, whether it be medical professionals or professionals in the EPA. It's just amazing to me how with very little education, they can make a ruling on subjects that they're not really they really don't have the expertise to talk about.
The CPA case, they did not even invite expert testimony. They just listened to the lawyers and said, okay, we're going to say that the EPA can't regulate CO2. Sorry, guys. Good luck. And the legislatures have to now be the scientific experts.
It's scary. The whole thing is scary because of the fact that what's going to happen is, number one, most important thing, this has to do with guns, they don't have the infrastructure in order to enforce any of these new proclamations. They don't have it.
You mean the Supreme Court doesn't?
No, yes, people have to say, for instance, no abortion or whatever.
John, thank you for the call. I'm getting lost in the logic here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Picking up your calls on the other side of this break. Stick around. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality
And it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy, which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
You know, the Republicans are saying that the solution to mass shootings is to harden our schools. But the schools aren't the only places where mass shootings are happening. I mean, we've had mass shootings in grocery stores, churches, elementary schools, hospitals, doctors' offices, bars, dance clubs, restaurants, roads, highways, town parks, national parks, gas stations, buses, in post offices, in department stores, in malls, in places of business, in people's homes or near them, in apartment buildings, in airports we had a mass shooting, baseball fields, football fields. I mean, you add all this stuff up, and do you really think that the Republicans' logic that we just need to harden every place where there might be a mass shooting by having one door in and out, turn it into a fire trap, and arm everybody around? This makes no sense at all. None whatsoever. I got a video about this with a complete list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Nate just tracked down that Gavin Newsom ad, and we will play it for you in about 10 minutes or so. He's got to prepare it for playing on the air. Edgar in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Hey, Edgar, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. I was listening to the news the other day, and they were talking about some things that young guy that did that shooting, he had posted some of his thoughts online, and I
saw one of them.
That there's got to be a way to begin to get at that's the foundation of our action, how we think, what we think about. The Bible said, as a man thinketh, so is he. And if you think about having a relationship with a woman that's not your wife, you are an adulterer already. And somehow we got to change the way we think. Yeah. I see people let somebody that tells them 2 and 2 is 3, and they've been knowing all their life it's been 4.
Yeah, people refer to it, Edgar, as the battle for hearts and minds, and I think you're absolutely right. Any suggestions on how to do this?
I think one thing came to my mind. It should be a part of our education that we ask questions, and how would you? We ask questions.
Yeah, critical thinking skills. That's what you're talking about. I mean, in most countries they teach critical thinking in schools. We don't here in the United States, and we should. Right. How do you evaluate something? How does a scientist evaluate a hypothesis or an assertion? How should we understand the media? Finland has started a whole program teaching kids how to look at social media and realize that the algorithms are pushing stuff at you constantly that maybe you don't want and maybe doesn't reflect actually widespread public opinion. So I'm with you, Edgar. I think, absolutely. Mike, and thank you for the call. Mike in Arlington, Texas. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi. My concern is messaging that the Democrats are using. And one thing I think we could call the Supreme Court is a Sharia court. And my thinking on that is Sharia means God's law, and the same God is in the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, are all the same God. So why not just, if the Republicans can use CRT and misname that, and they hate the name Sharia courts, Sharia law, why not just call it a Sharia court?
Well, because I don't want to trash talk Islam, but I get your point. I mean, it's not that different.
The Supreme Court would be an insult to the Islam.
Yeah, I mean, there are countries. Sharia law does not require that people be beheaded if they speak against the king. I mean, the way that Sharia law is instituted in Saudi Arabia is radically different from the way that Sharia law is instituted in many other Muslim countries. And
right,
so,
and I would agree with that.
And so, I think it's important not to use somebody else's religion as an insult against our court. I totally get your point. And right. Try to justify this stuff with religion, particularly Alito with his abortion decision, quoting 14th century witch burners, is nuts. But and I think that we need to come up with some new name for our court. But Sharia wouldn't be it for me. But Mike, I get what you're saying, and I understand and agree with your sentiment broadly. Thank you for the call, Scott in California City, California. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Aloha, my brother.
Hey. Did you say aloha?
Aloha, my brother.
Hey, you must have lived in Hawaii at some point. Aloha, Scott. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm originally from Wake Island.
Oh, okay. Oh, way over there in the Pacific.
Yes.
So what's on your mind?
Well, I've lived my entire life realizing my ignorance on a great many topics that I know very little or nothing about. And my realization of my own ignorance prevents me from being stuck on stupid. And so many people out there, they get a little bit of information, and next thing you know, they wrote the book on it because they're the subject matter expert.
Right.
And so when a person lack of knowledge or skill in different areas, that it usually causes people to overestimate their own confidence.
Yeah, there's also a whole psychological syndrome, Dunning-Kruger, I think it's called, where people overestimate their expertise. But I get your point, and I also think that there's this kind of cultural fear of saying I'm wrong. There's certainly, you will not ever find a Republican who's willing to say I'm wrong or I made a mistake. It's just like it's part of the party doctrine. And very rarely will Democrats do it. People in politics are very afraid of this. And I say I don't know or I was wrong all the time, and I feel like that actually enhances my credibility if I don't know but I'll look it up, or I was wrong, I made a mistake, but I'm going to correct it here. I think that's what people have to do. And so, Scott, I applaud you for understanding the limitations of your own understanding. More of us need to be thinking that way. George in Lakewood, Colorado. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Yes. I just had the subject of the television shows. There's a marathon of murder shows that never, it isn't interrupted by any other kind of show. It's just continuous. And I think that's it's bad for adults and kids.
Yeah.
And
I don't underestimate the impact of media, George. And I believe it was Bill Maher did a really good piece. It might have been John Oliver. Did a really good piece on guns and violence and the relationship there between, and our movies are all about revenge and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure it was Bill Maher, a couple of weeks ago, and it was really very thoughtful. I thought it was great. But let's keep in mind that there are countries all over the world where these same video games are being played, and in some cases even more gruesome, like in Japan, and they do not have a problem with mass shootings or mass murders or mass violence. So, it's not just that simple. George, excellent point, though. By the way, let me just lay two questions on the table here. Number one, I just caught this story over on Drudge, NBCnews.com. Communities across the United States were left shaken after fireworks were mistaken for gunfire during multiple 4th of July celebrations. They talk about one in Orlando where 12 people were injured. Fireworks went off and people started stampeding, thinking they were being shot at. Another one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, another one in Philadelphia, etc. Is it time to end fireworks? I can tell you my cats would be very happy if we ended fireworks, as would the bunnies that live in our neighborhood and the birds. And I'm fine if we just stopped using fireworks for the 4th of July, number one. And number two, I'm going to play this ad that Gavin Newsom is running down in Florida right now. And my question for you is, do you think he might be, not do you think he might be running for president? Obviously, he's running for president. Do you think he has a shot at it, either in 2024 or 2028? So here's the ad.
It's Independence Day, so let's talk about what's going on in America. Freedom, it's under attack in your state. Your Republican leaders, they're banning books, making it harder to vote, restricting speech in classrooms, even criminalizing women and doctors. I urge all of you living in Florida to join the fight. Or join us in California, where we still believe in freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom to choose, freedom from hate, and the freedom to love. Don't let them take your freedom.
Paid for by Newsom for...
Newsom, Gavin Newsom. I think he wants to be America's Justin Trudeau, and I frankly think he has a shot at it. So, I mean, we'll see how it shakes out, right? And the Democratic primary is going to be real interesting if there is one. I'm assuming that there will be, in a year and a half or thereabouts. But Gavin Newsom is putting down markers, and he's taking on Ron DeSantis. Good on you, Gavin. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. James in Turlock, California. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Well, what's on my mind is the Supreme Court. Of course, there's so many decisions I've disagreed with over the last week, but the one reversing Roe versus Wade brought me to mind that I think it's pushed us back even further than the 50 years since Roe, because my dad was a small-town doctor in Nebraska, and in about 67 or 68, I'm your age, when I was a junior or senior or sophomore in high school. And it was a question in the news. Sometimes I'd hear stories about it. So I asked him, have you ever performed an abortion? And he said, yes. And I was kind of shocked. And I said, isn't that illegal? And what he said to me is, well, if the mother's life is in danger, then it's okay. It's not illegal. And I looked kind of puzzled, I guess, because he continued on and said, if a woman says to me that she's going to kill herself if her parents or her boyfriend or her husband or somebody finds out that she's pregnant, then her life is in danger. And yes, I would do that then without asking anybody. It was part of the legal. And remember, the Hippocratic Oath starts with first do no harm. So, scientifically, those doctors didn't believe they were hurting.
Yeah, when I was in high school, James, I knew, and this was in the 66, 67, I knew of two girls who, colleagues of mine, as it were, who had abortions. One was an illegal abortion, and she died, and the other was a girl who simply, I know who impregnated her. And she went in and said that she was having a really hard time with her period, and she needed to be scraped, D&C. Yeah. And they did it, and that was the end of that. And everybody, it was a wink and a nod. I mean, if you could afford to pay for the abortion, which was just a few $100s back then, you could get it. But it's going to be a whole different world for young women now.
Just remember, when we were young, we were understood in school, even as elementary, and we couldn't marry our first cousins because that could lead to some hereditary monster or something like that. Now a father raping his daughter or brother or something, you can't even get an abortion for. I call it a therapeutic abortion because I worked for Medicaid for a while, and we just called it a TA, because the word is so offensive, abortion, to some people. So to me, it's a therapeutic abortion, and almost everybody that gets one, there's some therapy about it, for them anyhow.
Right. Yeah, the bottom line, though, is that, James, as two guys sitting here who will never have to confront that horrible choice, I mean, we may have a spouse or friend or child who does, but really this is... And I'm not one of those guys who says, oh, we should just leave this entirely up to the women, because men have to vote too, and we need to vote for people who give women the power to choose that. But this really is the choice of a woman or a person who is pregnant.
I hear you, Tom. Thanks for all the education you've given me over the years.
Thank you, James, for the call and for your kind words. Good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So are you and your family and your kids safer with a gun in the house? Well, Pew Research Center and Children's Hospital put together some amazing statistics. These are all quotes from their study. Quote, guns kept in homes are more likely to be involved in a fatal or non-fatal accidental shooting, criminal assault, or suicide attempt than to be used to injure or kill in self-defense. Your kids aren't safer either. Quote, between 2015 and 2020, there were at least 2,070 unintentional shootings by children that resulted in 765 deaths and 1,366 non-fatal gun injuries. In 2020 alone, at least 125 toddlers and children under age 5 shot themselves or someone else. And the pandemic didn't help. Unintended shootings in 2020 from March to December went up more than 30% compared to the previous year. And a shocking number of gun owners leave their firearms lying around unsecured. 1 in 3 guns are unlocked in the homes. I've got a video with all the details over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, Tim in Jackson, Wyoming. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, quickly to your point about fireworks, in addition to your pets and local neighborhood bunnies, I would also suggest that there's quite a few firefighters and combat veterans that would like us to stop using fireworks. Anyway, I wanted to follow up on the caller from Indiana talking about the permitless carry. I'm originally from Indiana. Before they did the permitless carry, they actually made permits free about a year ago, July actually of last year, 2021. That money, all of the money that was raised from permits, about $5.5 million a year, went to law enforcement agencies for training and for purchasing their weapons. So essentially, what the Republicans did when they made permits free is they defunded the police. And there's actually there's actually an article. Now, they said that they were going to replace it with taxpayer money, with grant money, so on and so forth. There's an article January of this year in the Fort Wayne Business Weekly, I believe, where the sheriff of Angola, a town in northern Indiana, is complaining that they are not actually receiving that money, that he wanted to buy all of his deputies new handguns this year, and he's not able to afford to do so because the money that they lost from the permits. So the Republican Party in Indiana that's screaming about the Democrats wanting to defund the police, defunded the police in Indiana.
Amazing. And you know, by the way, who else supports, generally speaking, an assault weapons ban nationwide? Cops.
Oh, most police. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're outgunned.
Yeah, they were actually so the police. If you the police were against the bill, the bill from last year, the one that defunded defunded them. They spoke out against it. Right. But Indiana Republicans said, well, we're going to do what's right for the
Republicans don't care about the cops. They'll use them when it's in their interest, and they'll suck up to them, when they think that'll get them votes. But at the end of the day, they don't care about the lives of our police. If they did, they'd get the guns off the streets, these weapons of war. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now they put more guns in the hands of citizens and less guns in the hands of police. The police have fewer guns thanks to the citizens having more guns now.
Insane. Tim, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
I was wondering if I don't know if it's possible, but if legislation could be passed that all electronic media prior to the program beginning, they actually have to define it as either news, entertainment, or opinion. If that would help, resolve any issues in regards to the way information is gathered by people.
The problem would be if someone, say Fox News, asserts that they are actually news rather than opinion. How do you prove that that's not true? Somebody's got to be the arbiter of that. There has to be some, federal bureaucracy or agency that determines what's news and what's not. And, in a rational administration, I'd have no problem with that. But if Donald Trump became president again, or if Ron DeSantis becomes president, I would have absolutely no faith in that agency. This is one of those areas where I agree with a lot of conservatives who say, there have to be limits to government power. And this is just one of those examples. I understand what you're trying to say, Mike. And the fairness doctrine actually worked quite well in that regard. Not that it required, a balance of opinions, because arguably it didn't. I mean, it only technically did with editorial opinions from the ownership of the stations. But because it said that radio and television stations must, quote, program in the public interest, end quote, and that was broadly interpreted to mean real news, and ABC, NBC, CBS, and AP all produced real news broadcasts for radio and television stations for the three big television networks at a loss, because that was the cost of keeping their licenses. There was this ethos of real news that went along with it. But I'm not sure we can recapture that. I mean, it could be a real struggle.
But hasn't Fox already categorized a lot of their talent as entertainment as opposed to news?
They did that when they were sued. And in fact, there was one lawsuit last year where the assertion was made that anybody who thinks that, I think it was Tucker Carlson, it was one of their primetime shows, anybody who believes that this is absolute fact, is nuts wasn't the word that they used, but some
the intelligent person would know that was not.
Yeah, it was words to that effect. A person with any kind of discernment or understanding should be able to immediately understand that Fox is not providing actual news. And then of course there was the Fox RGBH lawsuit, which wasn't about Fox News, it was about Fox-owned television stations down in Florida back 15 years ago, where Jane Aker and Steve Wilson sued the station because they got fired for refusing to lie about Monsanto's bovine growth hormone. And the court upheld their lawsuit, their wrongful termination, and Fox appealed that to the appeals court. And the appeals court ruled that Fox can order their on-air talent to lie to their viewers. They have that power. It's as an employer, they have that power. And Steve and Jane lost the lawsuit ultimately at the appeals level. So, it's like Fox will say one thing in court and another thing on the air, shall we say. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back at the top of the hour here. Dr. Bruce Grayson is going to be with us on the other side of this. I think you're going to find this fascinating. What does a near-death experience tell us about life?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not, but fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin, and prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe, end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such. For, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Dr. Bruce Greyson, MD. He is the Carlson Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia Health System, and the author of a new book, After, a Doctor Explores What Near-Death Experiences Reveal About Life and Beyond. His website, Bruce Greyson, Greyson. That's also his Twitter handle, @Bruce Greyson. And Dr. Greyson, welcome to the program. It's an absolutely fascinating book and an absolutely fascinating topic. Can you start out by telling us what got you interested in looking into near-death experiences?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on the show, Tom. I'm glad to be able to talk to you today. I was raised in a materialistic scientific household where there was no talk about spirituality or religion. We just assumed that if it wasn't physical, it wasn't real. And when you die, you die. That's the end of it. And that was fine with us. And then I went through college and medical school with that mindset. And then when I started my psychiatric training, I started being confronted by patients who claimed they had left their bodies when they were almost dead and could see things and hear things from an out-of-body perspective while they were apparently unconscious. And I couldn't make any sense out of that. I thought they were just, psychiatric patients who knows what they're saying. And about 5 years later, after I collected a few of these cases, one of my colleagues, Raymond Moody, published a book called Life After Life, in which he gave us this name, near-death experiences, and described what they were like. And I realized for the first time that these patients who were telling me these stories weren't just making things up, but they were part of a worldwide phenomenon that was quite common.
I remember Moody's book. In fact, my wife's father had surgery and told stories about what he heard in the room. Isn't there a general belief that, well, maybe the anesthetic is just not quite as effective as we think it is, or something like that? Or were you finding stories in your research and the research of others of people, where it has gone way beyond something that just could have been overheard in the operating room, for example, if the anesthetic was not working the way it should?
Sure, Tom. It does go way beyond what you can hear if the anesthesia wasn't working. People see things, people are aware of things, not only in the operating room, but often at a distance that they couldn't possibly have known if it was just a hallucination based on anesthesia, or if they were somehow still hearing things despite the fact they were unconscious.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One fellow I knew was a 55-year-old truck driver who was driving around with his truck, and he had crushing chest pain. And he made it to the emergency room where they tested him and found he had 4 blood vessels to his heart that were clogged. So they rushed him to the operating room for an emergency quadruple bypass. And he told me that in the middle of the operation, he looked down at his body and saw his surgeon flapping his elbows like he was trying to fly. Now, when he told me this, I had been a doctor for about 30 years. I couldn't imagine this was really happening. I'd never heard of anything so ridiculous. So I said to him, I wonder if you were hallucinating. And he insisted it was true, and he insisted that I talk to his doctor and ask him about it. So I tracked down his doctor, and his doctor said, well, yes, I do that. I've developed this habit. I've never seen anyone else do it. I let my assistants start the operation, and when I get gowned and gloved with my sterile gown and gloves on, I walk into the operating room and watch them start the procedure. And I don't want to risk touching anything that's not sterile, so I place my hands flat on my chest where I know they won't touch anything. And I point things out to them with my elbows so I don't accidentally touch something non-sterile. And he illustrated just the way the patient did. And there's no way the patient could have known that unless he had actually seen it, as he said.
Wow. Yeah. The second chapter of your book is titled Outside of Time.
Yes.
Tell us about this.
Well, most near-death experiences say that in this realm or dimension where the NDE takes place, there is no sense of time as we know it. There's no linear flow of time. It's as if everything is happening all at once, past, present, future. There's no distinction. And that's kind of puzzling to me because they describe it as if a sequence of events. This happened, then this, then this. And I don't see how you can have that without having a passage of time. And they tell me, well, it's a paradox when I tell you about it here. But when I was living it, it wasn't a paradox at all. And you hear people talking about, I mean, you can see this through the centuries. People who have written about their near-death experiences talk about reliving their entire lives in great detail. And the whole near-death experience only took a matter of a second or two. So clearly they have a sense of time being different in the near-death experience.
Now, I confess I read your book quite some time ago, or several months ago anyway, maybe a little longer. And I believe that what I'm about to describe is an article that I read recently. You probably know there was this, I believe it was an article that showed that when people are in the process of dying, that the type of brain, and they found this from people who were somehow wired to EEGs when they weren't expected to die, but they did die. And the type of brain activity was the kind of brain activity that's typically associated with, deep dive into memory.
Right.
Are you familiar with this?
Yes, that was actually one single case of an 87-year-old man who had a traumatic brain injury and a subdural hematoma, and he had seizures that would not stop. So this was not a normal brain by any means. Mm-hmm. And they had him hooked up to an EEG to measure his seizures when he happened to have a heart attack and died. So they had recordings of his brain waves before, during, and after his death. And it showed a relative increase in one type of brainwave. It was a decrease, but compared to other brainwaves, it was a relative increase. And they said that type of brainwave can be associated with memory. Unfortunately, it's also associated with many other things, including intention to move, strong emotion, and most importantly, it's highly associated with muscle artifact from the skull. For example, if you're clenching your teeth or wrinkling your forehead, that will cause the same types of tracings on the EEG. So it wasn't clear what they were really measuring.
Yeah. So chapter 11 of your book, The Mind is Not the Brain.
Right.
We tend to think of our brains as this computer and our minds as something that lives within it. How are you disassociating these?
Well, yeah, of course, I grew up with that model also, that the mind is what the brain does.
Yeah, very Cartesian.
And certainly there's evidence for that. When you get intoxicated, you don't think very clearly. Or when you get a stroke or hit on the head, that affects your thinking. So in normal everyday life, it seems as if mind and brain are the same thing. But in extreme circumstances, they seem to separate. One example is the near-death experience, when people's brains are demonstrably going offline, and yet they report having the most vivid experiences they've ever had. But there are others as well. For example, there's something called terminal lucidity, in which people with end-stage Alzheimer's disease, whose brains have been seriously deteriorating and they can't recognize family or communicate, suddenly become completely lucid again and can talk, carry on conversations, recognize people. And then a few hours later, they die. And there's no explanation for this in medical terms of how this can possibly happen. The brain can't regenerate itself. We've also done, in the past 20 years, neuroimaging of people having psychedelic drug trips. And what we found, to our surprise, was that the more elaborate mystical drug experiences are associated with a decrease in brain activity, not an increase as we thought it would be.
Yeah, I have to say, taking LSD when I was 16 or 17 years old altered my understanding of life for my entire life. I mean, I still carry that memory, and in a very positive way. I'm not suggesting anybody should do it, but it was a turning point for me, a spiritual turning point. Which brings me to, I'm curious your thoughts on the spirituality of all this, on the idea of the permanence of consciousness, or the transportation of consciousness as defined by reincarnation in some of our religions, or you know, what are your thoughts based on all this research about that?
Well, it seems clear to me from near-death experiences and other phenomena that our consciousness, our minds, that part of us that thinks and feels, are not limited solely to the brain, and yet they seem in everyday life to be associated with the brain. So what is the relationship? Well, people are using the idea that the brain is a filter for the mind. An example is a television set. There are hundreds of television stations being beamed at you all the time. If you try to watch them all at once, you wouldn't be able to understand them. But the television set receives these signals and filters out all but one, the one you want to watch. And that allows you to use it, to see it and hear it. And the idea is that the brain does the same thing. It receives thoughts and feelings from the mind, wherever that is, and eliminates, filters out all the irrelevant things like encountering deceased loved ones, encountering a deity, and just lets in the, quote, important things, the things that the brain was designed to do to help you survive in the physical world, find food, shelter, a mate, avoid predators. So the mind normally just filters out all these irrelevant, quote, spiritual things. But in a situation where the brain is shutting down, like a near-death experience, that filtering function gets weakened, and all these other phenomena come in. You get a flowering of consciousness, as you did with your LSD trip. And other things come in that you normally don't have access to.
So does that, we have about a minute and a half left here, does that suggest to you that there is consciousness beyond life and death?
Definitely does. Yes, I can't prove it. I'm not sure. I may be misreading the data, but it seems as if consciousness can survive without the brain and after the brain has died.
And where does this consciousness come from, and where does it go when we die?
That's a great question, Tom. I have no idea.
Yeah, me neither. But it does, you know, it has occurred to me on more than one occasion, particularly when I took that LSD trip, that first one, that the entire universe is made of consciousness.
Yes.
What do you think about that theory?
Well, a lot of philosophers are coming to that conclusion now. And in fact, a lot of quantum physicists are coming to that conclusion as well, that consciousness is a part of the universe just the way matter is, and that it's not built from matter, but it's independent of matter and exists along with it.
That perhaps matter itself might even be slowed down consciousness, if consciousness is energy?
Well, some people are saying that. I'm not sure I understand how that could happen, but that it is a theory that's being proposed.
Well, the math would be the amount of energy necessary to make a piece of matter would be the energy times the speed of light squared, right?
Yes.
There you go. Okay, brilliant work. Dr. Bruce Greyson, MD. The book is After. A Doctor Explores What Near-Death Experiences Reveal About Life and Beyond. Bruce Greyson, GREYSON.com, and Bruce Greyson on Twitter. Dr. Greyson, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Back at you. Thank you so much. And thanks for writing a brilliant book. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we can get back to talking about politics or near-death experiences if you'd like. I'll pick up your calls after this. And welcome back. Oop, hang on just a second. Push the wrong button there. There we go. Scott in Seattle. Hey, Scott, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Mr. Hartmann, my call is about the furious abortion controversy. I'd like to make part of our divisions a little less bad than it could be. I need a minute and a half. Can I go ahead?
Sure.
I ask listeners not to assume that all Catholics are implacable enemies of women's reproductive rights. To the contrary, most Catholics line right up with the rest of the population in their views about contraception, abortion, and related women's rights to privacy, especially their right to make their own health care decisions. I have no official status, no connection to the church hierarchy. I'm an ordinary lay Catholic, but I deal with other lay Catholics, especially those who care about church reform. It's true we don't like abortion, just like we don't like divorce. There's lots of things we don't like, rape and incest and other crimes. The point is not whether we like abortion. Of course we don't. The point is what a person finding herself in an unwanted pregnancy can best do under difficult circumstances. Most Catholics believe that this should be reasonably left to the woman herself in her own particular situation, in consultation with her medical providers, and maybe with whatever take on faith she has. I can tell you for sure what Catholics don't want. That's to force desperate young women to mutilate themselves or go to those horrible back alley butchers.
Yeah.
Again, all I ask listeners, don't automatically make assumptions about the opposition. I want to hope that if reasonable people can thoughtfully work on problems such as abortion, we can come to ways of dealing with it as best we can in an imperfect world. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Scott. And I get what you're saying. I broadly agree with what you're saying. My concern is that arguably the richest, wealthiest and most powerful nonprofit corporation in the world, the Catholic Church, has poured billions of dollars in the United States into politicians who are trying to take away our right to choose, or a woman's right to choose to have an abortion or not. And I have a problem with that mixing politics and religion. But
you're not the only one who has a problem with that, Mr. Hartmann.
Yeah,
and a lot
totally
of reform-minded Catholics want to get away from exactly that.
Yeah, I'm with you. The church needs to go back to religion. Scott, in fact, they should be dealing with the issues that we were just talking with Dr. Grayson about. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Good day to you.
Hey, Bob, back at you.
Yeah. Hey, well, that's interesting. I listening to your previous guest there on, I just think the world's in a state of acceleration, and so many people are kind of stuck in some cement. But I just want to get right on with what I was going to say, which is that when we say rational, we might take a step back if we're going to value critical thought. This public education, this lack of it, this dismantling of public education is I think, essentially what's going haywire with the country.
I don't disagree. It started with Reagan, as you well know.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So I just, yeah, my hat's off to the public educators. Randy Underwood.
Bob, you must have a VoIP phone because it's crashing in the face of our music. I can't hear you. But Bob, thank you for the call. I totally get what you're saying. And don't disagree with it at all. 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. In literally 1 minute. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back, 23 minutes past the hour. Brenda in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Hey, Brenda, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I remember years ago I read an article about how the Federalist Society was preparing Comey Barrett for the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. But in that, I thought she had made it the question that she had a problem with the 13th and 14th Amendment. But in the Legal Defense Fund, it has, where she has, I see it says, okay, Barrett has written that the entire 14th Amendment is possibly illegitimate, and that Brown versus Board of Education, which ended legal apartheid in the United States, may have been incorrectly decided, and that the entire administrative state may be untenable from the originalist perspective. She signed a newspaper advertisement stating that it's time to put the end to barbaric legacy of Roe versus Wade. And she made a speech suggesting that part of the Civil Rights Act does not protect transgender persons. Right. But it's not just that they are doing this now. They have a broader agenda. These are, yes, I was Catholic for 27 years, and it can be a wonderful faith, but the originalist type attitude comes from the Catholic faith, and these are all very far right-wing Catholics.
Yeah.
And to me, it is, you cannot dictate what God is to someone else. You can't do it.
I agree with you, or at least you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't try to do it because A, most often it doesn't work, and B, it's just not right. But Brenda, that's absolutely what's going on. I get what you're saying, and I remember when those things about Barrett came out, and it just like wasn't even taken seriously during her hearings. It was just a disgrace. Brenda, thank you for the call. Joe in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering if there's ever been any legislation proposed to tax ammunition for the carnage and the cost it causes. And
I don't know if it's ever been proposed legislatively. You're probably the 100th caller who has suggested that over the last decade or so on this program. But, I don't know. If anybody knows of any efforts to tax or regulate ammunition, I'd love to hear about it. But I think...
And then my other question is, how come the states haven't done like class action lawsuits to pay for the carnage and the school preparation and all that?
Because Congress passed a law about 30 years ago that gave the weapons industry absolute immunity from lawsuits. This is why the, I don't recall if it was Sandy Hook or Parkland, I think it might have been the Sandy Hook families, sued Remington. And they wanted to sue for, manufacturing AR-15s that killed their kids, but they couldn't do that because of this law that Congress passed, which, in my opinion, needs to be repealed. So they ended up suing Remington because of its advertising, the Punch Your Man card ads and ads targeting young men like Adam Lanza, the guy who shot up, Sandy Hook, the school there, and Sandy Hook Elementary. And they won. They won $74 million, if I'm remembering correctly, which was the limit of the insurance policy that Remington had. I'm pretty sure it was Remington. It's possible I'm wrong, but Sean is pretty sure too. So I think we can safely say that. But that's as far as it goes, Joe. Joe, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. We'll continue our conversations, your calls and my thoughts and the news of the day on the other side of this break. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and the gun manufacturers would really rather you didn't know all about.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Exposing the con and conservative. More of your calls on the other side of this break.
Our book today is Microtrends Squared by Mark Penn. The first chapter, The Building Blocks of Change Today, The Power of Microtrends. We live in a microtrends world. It's driven by granular, often opposite patterns of human behavior that seem small but punch above their size. We've identified these powerful patterns as microtrends, and the world is full of them. Together, they are the dots of a global impressionist painting that comes to life when you step back and look at it holistically. These forces have only become more impactful in recent years, and they've started to upend society. 10 years ago, when I first identified these patterns in change and microtrends, I saw a world of boundless opportunities. I was over-the-top optimistic about how microtrends would produce a new world of personalized products on our shelf, and how in Washington they would produce an even greater selection of fresh, first-rate political choices. Of course, that's not exactly what happened. Instead, the information age has given way to the disinformation age, in which fake information abounds. The nation founded on free speech is grappling with how to live with free speech in the era of the internet troll. The optimism around our economy faded with the unexpected crash of 2008, followed by a historically slow recovery over a decade. Only now is it recovering. Unparalleled consumer choice is leading not to the growth of more startups, but to the dominance of just a few internet companies which are amassing more and more power on the basis of data gleaned from willing but unknowing consumers. And the older generations who in their own youth led a rebellion have now dug in their heels against the politics and culture of today's new generations. What makes the microtrend such a powerful tool in this moment is that it can unpack and explain changes that we're seeing that otherwise make no sense. On the surface, for example, the middle class can seem to be shrinking, and this is alarming. But it is only by digging deeper and seeing that education is driving more people into the upper classes that we can come to understand these overall statistics at a more molecular level. Often, two diametrically opposed trends are occurring at the same time, which would be invisible in the averages, but which leap out when understood as the result of a cauldron of microtrends. Today in politics, for example, there is no overall ideological shift. Instead, one group of moderates became more conservative and another group became more liberal, causing society to become both more liberal and more conservative at the same time, essentially canceling each other out. This increased polarization then produces even more gridlock and confusion. We can see similar tugs and pulls throughout society. While one group seeks more technology, another one wants to sit in the Amtrak quiet car. Some can't sit through a 6-second commercial. Others spend hours and hours binge-watching TV. Some live in a world of globalization, while others yearn for a return to greater nationalism. To explain all this, we've borrowed from Newtonian physics. For every trend, there is a counter-trend. It's human nature in the information age. Every move or desire in one direction seems to inspire a counter-move by another group in the opposite direction. For every radical group, there's a new conservative group. For every new product in mobile technology, there are those sticking to the flip phone. Only by understanding the complexity of these developments can we make sense of a world that seems senseless, confused, and even jumbled. While in 2007, microtrends allowed you to navigate the changes of the day, now microtrends squared lets you better understand the emerging chaos as the seesawing of opposite forces fighting for dominance in the social, political, and cultural worlds. In the last decade, technology was able to exploit and even conquer the world of microtrends with its ability to customize products and our lives based on AI and big data. But even as these attempts have transformed our lifestyles, they've also led to some serious unintended consequences that have further clouded society. Microtrends disentangles many of these shifts and lies at the source of many battles for power that have disrupted our world today. As you'll see throughout this book, those ongoing battles will result in some very unlikely winners, losers, and shifts in the overall power match of society. While the technology behind increased personalization of goods and services has been providing us with more choice in our daily life, we've instead been making fewer choices, burrowing into comfortable silos. We expected that the advances in our ability to customize goods and services would open us all up to a new world of never-ending experimentation. A decade later, exactly the opposite has occurred, and our society has become increasingly polarized, with people finding choices they like and picking them over and over again. In 2007, microtrends explained how the Starbucks economy had succeeded the Ford economy. In the Ford economy, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was black. The aim of industry was to mass-produce products at the lowest possible cost, and that meant standardization of goods. But the new economy of the 21st century was moving starkly away from that model, instead providing consumers with any color they wanted. The Starbucks economy was based on creating greater value through customization, even of simple products like coffee and tea. People everywhere became more individualistic in their tastes and were rebelling from carefully mowed lawns and white picket fences. The marketplace responded to these trends by allowing people to have it their own way, and they did. The theory was that more choice would result in a happier and more satisfied group of consumers. Variety would open consumers up to new experiences, in many ways bringing us closer together, allowing us to mix, match, and try out all sorts of new options. Something rather surprising happened, however, as consumers got more choice. The boom of microtrends. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. The Economic Policy Institute just came out with a great summary of what's causing inflation and what are the myths about inflation. They go through the 5 major myths, the lies. Number one, that
workers' wage growth is driving inflation. Actually, workers' wage growth is going up more slowly than inflation. It's holding inflation back. Myth number 2, that corporate profits are not the cause of inflation. Actually, more than half of the inflation that we're experiencing right now can be tracked directly to corporations ripping us off. Myth number 3, federal relief and recovery measures overheated the economy and caused inflation. If you look over the last 40 years, you see that that's very much not the case. You might be able to build a case for the Fed feeding it, but probably not. Myth number 4, removing import tariffs would be a major tool to fight inflation. Not so much. And myth number 5, investing in child care and elder care would accelerate it. Nope, not the case. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Back 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Tony in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hi, good afternoon, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm curious about your take on my theory about the provocateur mode. These pullovers, these violent traffic stops, and the mass shootings that seem to target, kids that aren't really doing much. They're maybe making deliveries, or even folks who had a bad past, but they've changed their ways. People who are in neighborhoods that are uplifters, possible leaders. I'm wondering if you have an idea about how people are targeting this potential group of leaders.
I don't know, Tony. I do know that, when the Black Panthers were around, I was alive at that time. In fact, my wife lived in a house that was the Black Panther house in East Lansing. When she was 16, 17 years old. And so we had some familiarity, or 17 or 18. So we had some familiarity with the movement, and they were clearly being targeted. I was in SDS. We were mostly white, and we were mostly anti-war, and we were targeted. I was arrested around that. A number of my friends were. I've seen it firsthand. I can tell you, in depth what it was like in the 60s. What's going on right now, I'm just catching the news constantly, and whether people are being targeted because of their activism or whether they're simply being targeted because of the color of the skin or where they happen to be or what their car looks like, I can't speak to at the level of, having done some research on it, but I'm guessing it's out there. So.
Yeah, I definitely think it's out there. Anybody there's such a history of anybody who speaks up against Big Brother, big government, they just tend to focus on them. Again, one of the most popular is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Yeah. And when he started speaking as far as the economics of racism, that's when they really targeted him. Oh, yeah. And I just think it's funny how Dr. Grayson was talking about life and beyond. And we think about it in such a benevolent manner or religious manner, but it can also be applied to the darker side. Yeah. Whereas, people like the idea of making America great again and going back to fascist ways and just repeatedly doing this fascism and limiting people's prospects. And the best way to do it is to get rid of our leaders, our potential guiding lights.
Yeah. Well, I very much hope that is not the case, Tony. And although, like I said, I know that 50 years ago it very much was the case. It absolutely was the case. Tony, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. And thanks, provocative question. Holly in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hey, Holly, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. 2 points. First of all, I think Joe Biden was the only man who could have beat Donald Trump. But I do believe in 2024, DeSantis is going to run, and I think that Newsom has got to get the nomination. I think that Biden is too old, although I think he's brilliant. I'm not using ageism against him, but picture him against DeSantis, and Newsom is the antidote to that.
Yeah.
So there's a tip line where we can call the White House at, I believe it's 202-456-1111.
That's correct.
Thank President Biden for everything he's done and ask him to not run in 24.
Okay. Okay, all right, I get it, Holly. I don't know how this is going to shake out. I share your concerns broadly, and I think Gavin Newsom is a strong candidate. I also think Elizabeth Warren is a strong candidate. I think there are a couple of strong candidates, really, substantial strong candidates. I doubt Bernie's going to run again, and he's got the same problem Joe Biden does. He's getting old, although it doesn't show with Bernie. I mean, And I think that for Biden, his stuttering makes it seem like he's a little more doddering than he is, unfortunately.
Correct.
But
right. People say he's demented, and he's not. He has a stutter, and I tell them how cruel they are to call him demented. But I just think that Gavin Newsom could really win, beat DeSantis back. My last point is you don't want to smear Sharia law, and I understand that. I have now started calling the Supreme Court members Ayatollahs. I don't think they're any better
I don't have
than
a
the
problem with that.
Ayatollahs in Iran.
I don't have a problem with that. I'm with you, Holly. Ayatollahs in
Thank
black
you.
robes. Thank you very much for the call. AJ in Gainesville, Florida. Hey, AJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi. I wanted to talk about, well, the Supreme Court. Yeah, it's absolutely out of control. But I think that I wonder, are they really going to try to do something about Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas? I have my concerns about that. That's number one. But on a very positive note, and I don't know if somebody's already mentioned this because I'm really just tuning in about 15 minutes ago, and that's that DOJ is moving. And some of your listeners may have already heard the report about Alexander being in front of the federal grand jury in D.C. last week. And remember, he stopped the steal with Roger Stone.
Right.
And they were very closely involved with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the planning of the event and so forth. So I think that's probably the most significant thing that I've seen come out of that DOJ grand jury in D.C.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, AJ, is, there have been several members. I think Zoe Lofgren last week in the news was on one of the, I think it was on MSNBC, was talking about this, about how the DOJ has been reaching out to the January 6th committee saying, please share transcripts with us or transcripts of interviews and things. And the committee has been pushing back on that. And I think they should, because if the DOJ gets sworn testimony from somebody speaking before the January 6th committee, they can just stick that in a drawer. But if the DOJ has to convene a grand jury, which they have done, if they've got a federal grand jury, and that federal grand jury interviews somebody, and that somebody admits to or points the finger to a crime, that federal grand jury at that point has no choice. They can't stick it in a drawer. They have to issue an indictment or at least recommend an indictment. And so I think that the January 6th committee, in saying to the DOJ, do your own damn work, get your own damn grand jury, interview your own damn witnesses. And they're not saying it like that, but frankly, I think they should. I think they're doing the right thing. And the DOJ needs to be pushed into this. And I'm glad to hear that it's starting. I didn't catch the story about Alexander, but that's good news. AJ, thank you.
Yeah, they should be working together. I agree 100%.
Yeah, well, I think they should work together, but I don't think that the January 6th committee should be doing the DOJ's work for them. I really think that the DOJ's grand jury needs to be interviewing these people. AJ, got to run. Thank you. Michael in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Ron Chernow in 2010 won the Pulitzer Prize for writing Washington, A Life. And I would like to read something from another book that he wrote called Alexander Hamilton. It was his biography. Real short line, but this is why his book is going to be one of the first to go when Ron DeSantis gets his way in Florida.
Okay.
Here's the line. The Phocion essays contain the most withering critique that Hamilton ever leveled at Jefferson as a slaveholder, and they hint heavily at knowledge of the Sally Hemings affair.
Oh, it was public knowledge at the time. I mean, the Federalist newspapers were trashing Jefferson for it. I have the book, by the way, right here in my hand. We just got a copy of it last week. We're going to do a book report on it. But
I sent it to you.
But Hamilton also was involved in the slave trade at one point in his life. So it's like there's nobody whose hands, or very few people whose hands were completely clean on this issue back in that time. John Adams might have been one of the few, actually, although because he was from Massachusetts and he was outspokenly opposed to slavery. But then he had that fascist streak too. So it's like, geez, these are just very imperfect people and really tough times. Michael, thank you for the call. And some, I think you could say, even way beyond imperfect people, like Patrick Henry, just downright evil in many regards. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dennis in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Dennis, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing, man? I love you, and you're a patriot to this country. We need more people like you, and we need more free speech stuff like yours. But I just wanted to say that, first off, Ronald Reagan started something I call as the deconstruction of America, where they systematically taking our rights away bit by bit. And then, now, the Supreme Court is like the final phase of this deconstruction thing that they've been doing, because in his inaugural address, he said, we are not the Republican Party. We are the conservative party, using the Republican Party as a vessel to put forth our agenda. And I always wondered back then what he meant by our agenda. And as I watched over the years, I saw that. I'm the old newspaper boy you said, Supreme Court. So I just wanted to say that and see what you think about that. Thanks.
I didn't know that line was in Reagan's first inaugural address, where he said, "We are not the Republican Party." I'm representing a conservative movement within the Republican Party.
He said, "We are not the Republican Party. We are the conservative party, using the Republican Party as a vessel to put forth our agenda." That is quote unquote.
And that's a quote from what?
From his inaugural address.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up, Dennis. Dennis, thanks for that. I appreciate the tip, and thanks for your kind words. Rob in Waconia, Minnesota. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing today?
I'm fine. What's on your mind?
Good. Hey, I wanted to follow up on your fireworks comments. Not only do they scare your pets, but they also dump over 60,000 metric tons of CO2 into the environment.
Wow.
And also a significant amount of ozone. And the thing I'm thinking about, too, I was thinking about this morning, they shoot them off over our lakes and rivers all the time, because they're a fire hazard.
Yeah.
So all of that casing and junk falls into the water. And where does the water go?
Right, and and it's not just the paper. You've got a lot of toxic byproducts from those explosives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're poisoning the fish and the frogs and everybody else, and in a country where we're averaging a couple hundred shootings a day, or over 100 shootings a day. Do we really want to celebrate our nation by more shootings? By explosions, by It just seems wrong to me, Rob. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Cielito in Seattle. I'm sorry if I'm mangling your name. What's up? Cielito? Cielito? Listening on KBCS? I don't have Cielito. Apparently not. Okay, well, now I'm down to 20 seconds, so I'm going to not put another person on the line, but skyrocketing murder rates, claims the National Fraternal Order of Police. I'm telling you, this is going to be the issue, law and order, in the presidential election in 2 years. Get ready. The GOP is going to try to reprise Richard Nixon. And, it may well work. We'll see. Anyhow, I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Jessica Valenti publishes a newsletter called All in Her Head over at Substack.com, and it just has an amazing compilation of bizarre Republican statements about rape and abortion. Michigan Governor Garrett Soldano earlier this year said that there should be no exceptions for rape in the abortion laws because the next fetus might be the next president. Missouri State Representative Barry Hovis said that most sexual assaults are actually consensual rapes. Texas Republican Representative Michael Burgess says that we should ban abortion because if you watch a sonogram, they have movements that are purposeful. If they're a male baby, they have their hand between their legs. They feel pleasure. That's right. Women should be legally banned from getting an abortion so that their male fetuses can masturbate, writes Jessica Valenti. It's absolutely bizarre. Idaho Republican Vito Barberi says you can do a gynecological exam by swallowing a camera. What planet do these people live on? A whole list of them is on a video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Mario?
Hello? Yes, sir.
Hey, what's up?
Thank you for taking my call. Sure. I was concerned about Mr. Bruce Richardson when he described in the operation room where the patient was looking at it. That happened to me. That happened to me in 1961. I was watching my father, my sister, and my brothers, the demeaning of them when they saw me that I died, quote unquote. And I was watching them from above. And it's amazing. How can be so truthful? I thought I was the only one. And after hearing this doctor vision with that.
So you had a near-death experience when you were young?
I did.
Wow.
I was a very ill child and very, very sick. And the hospital sent me home. And then when I was in my father's hands, I died.
Wow.
And I look at myself. I look at my father grabbing my head. I look at my brother screaming to God, praying to God. I look at my sister, the meaning of each one of them. And then I came back to my body.
Wow.
It's so truthful, so truthful. And this happened. And very quickly, Mr. Tom, it's a major paper over here in Chicago. It has a report on this guy that killed and this part walking with the Trumpanians. It's amazing. It's just amazing how much can this happen. But thank you very much for taking my call, Mr. Hartmann. That exists in the death experience. It really happened. It happened to me.
I believe it, Mario. My mother described an experience somewhat like that when she gave birth to my youngest brother, and she nearly died. And you know, my wife's father had that experience when he had surgery. Yeah, I'm there. Mario, thank you. Brian in Beverly Hills. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. I have a question. Can the president declare a state of emergency on gun violence?
I don't know. I don't know. I know he has the ability to declare a state of emergency, but I don't know how constrained it is or what the necessary triggers would be under law. I'm just not an expert in that area at all. I'm sorry.
It seems to me that he could steal a line for Trump and just say we're declaring a state of emergency. You know, the gun violence is far more dangerous than any hurricane or tornado or earthquake or flood or any of these things.
Yeah.
It's just far more dangerous. If he declared an emergency, he could just steal from Trump and say, we're going to ban all guns until we can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, Brian. Two thoughts on that. Number one, Trump never did it, which means that there must be some real substantial guardrails to prevent you from doing it. And two, I don't think that would be probably a good idea, because if it was done by presidential fiat, it would not be viewed across the country as something that was, legitimate. On the other hand, if it's done by Congress, we elected those people. There are representatives. They come from all the states. And, if Congress does it, then it is viewed as legitimate. And so I think that it might blow up in his face if he tried to do it. But I certainly get, the outrage behind your question. I'm there with you, Brian. Thank you very much for the call. Laura in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, and I'm a long-time listener. So,
Thank you.
one of the points that I haven't heard much about is how many people will be impacted when the life of the mother is in jeopardy when an abortion is denied. Husbands will lose their wives. Children will lose their mothers. Mothers and fathers will lose their daughters. Brothers and sisters will lose their sisters. Friends will lose their friend. Even nieces and nephews will lose their aunts. So we need to encourage everyone we know to get involved and support codifying Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, I agree with you, Laura. I don't know if you caught the news, but in Poland, they've got a right-wing Catholic government, and they outlawed abortion. And in the last month or so, there have been 2 young women who died. In both cases, they had malformed fetuses who, because they couldn't get an abortion, they died within them, and then they went septic and died. And there's just huge protests around Poland on this. So, which may be the way that we go. I mean, we'll see. Laura, thank you for the call. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I would like to say to you, peace be with you. To which you might want to say, thank you.
And to you too.
And also with you, exactly. Jesus uses this to address our fear. And in the preamble to our Constitution, the people, in order to ensure domestic tranquility, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, we need to address these religious zealots, these judges and Republicans that are taking away our peace. We need to take away their peace, take away their guns to give us back our peace.
I get it. Lori, thank you. Nice, a fascinating point on which to end the show. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. Thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. So please get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We take life back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.